I'm Savannah Mitchell, 28, and I never thought a forgotten phone call would unravel my entire family. That evening, as my parents' voices echoed through my phone, speaker words never meant for my ears. I felt my world implode. Living with Savannah was the biggest mistake we ever made, my father said to my sister. She'll never know how much we resent her. The truth about my place in my family was never what I believed, and what happened next changed everything forever. Before I continue this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to join our storytelling community. Family betrayals like mine happen everywhere. Let's see if your story connects with mine. Now let's dive into how my quest for justice turned my family upside down. Growing up in suburban Chicago, I believed we were the picture-perfect American family. My parents, Richard and Ellen Mitchell, successful professionals in the medical field, provided a comfortable life for me and my younger sister, Brielle. Dad was the chief of surgery at Chicago Memorial, and Mom ran her own pediatric practice. Our sprawling 5-bedroom house in Lake Forest was the envy of our neighborhood, with its pristine landscaping and perfect holiday decorations every season. Brielle was born when I was 4, and from my earliest memories, she was treated like royalty. With her bouncy blonde curls and bright blue eyes just like Mom's, she became the family's golden child. I took after Dad's side with straight brown hair and hazel eyes. Growing up, I didn't think much about the subtle differences in how we were treated. When Brielle got a brand new car for her 16th birthday, while I received a used sedan at the same age, I attributed it to changing financial circumstances. When she got her dream Sweet 16 party at the country club, while mine was a modest gathering in our backyard, I figured my parents had simply become more established in their careers by the time she reached that milestone. I excelled academically, graduating valedictorian of my high school class and earning a full scholarship to Northwestern University, where I completed my degree in architecture. After college, I landed a job at a prestigious firm in downtown Chicago. When the pandemic hit in 2020, the firm downsized, and I was among the first to be let go. With rents in the city skyrocketing and my savings dwindling, my parents offered what seemed like the perfect solution. "Why don't you move back home for a while?" Mom suggested during a Sunday dinner. "Save up some money until you find a new position." "It would be great to have you back," Dad added, squeezing my shoulder. Family supports family during tough times. Their offer seemed genuine and loving. I gratefully accepted, thinking it would be a temporary arrangement of 6 months, maybe a year at most. I moved back into my childhood bedroom, now redecorated as a guest room, and tried to establish a routine. I contributed to household expenses, cooked dinner twice a week, and maintained the garden my mother loved, but never had time for. Brielle, meanwhile, was finishing her degree in fashion merchandising in New York. Despite her mediocre grades and multiple changes of major, my parents fully funded her education, her trendy apartment, and her lavish lifestyle. Again, I didn't question it. I just assumed they had more financial flexibility now than during my college years. As the months passed, I noticed subtle shifts in my parents' behavior toward me. Mom would sigh heavily when I used the kitchen, even though I always cleaned meticulously afterward. Dad would comment on my job search daily, asking pointed questions about interviews and applications. The warmth in their voices when speaking to me began to cool, replaced by terse responses and thin-lipped smiles. I redoubled my efforts to be the perfect house guest. I took over lawn maintenance entirely, deep-cleaned the house weekly, and even started handling their online bill payments to save them time. I found a part-time job at a local design studio, which didn't utilize my skills fully, but provided some income. I put every penny toward my eventual move-out fund. "We're so proud of you for persevering," Mom said one evening, but her eyes didn't match her words. There was something hollow in her praise, something forced in her smile. The strange tension continued to build as my temporary stay extended past 1 year, then 18 months. My job search in architecture remained difficult as the industry recovered slowly. I expanded my search nationwide, applying for positions in cities I'd never even visited, desperate to regain my independence. The rejections piled up, each one feeling more personal than the last. Then came the night of Brielle's graduation. My parents flew to New York for the ceremony, while I stayed behind due to work commitments. They promised to call so I could virtually participate in the celebration dinner. That evening, dressed up in my nicest outfit, despite being alone, I waited eagerly by my phone for their call. When it finally came, the video showed a jubilant scene at an upscale Manhattan restaurant. Brielle sat between our parents, a graduation cap charm on her bracelet catching the light. They toasted her success, my father's voice thick with emotion as he proclaimed how proud they were of their incredible daughter. My mother wiped away tears as she presented Brielle with a small blue box inside was a pair of diamond earrings that had belonged to my grandmother. I had always assumed those earrings would be mine someday. Grandmother had specifically mentioned them to me during her final days, saying how much they would suit me. The shock must have shown on my face because Brielle, ever perceptive, asked if something was wrong. Nothing, I said quickly. I'm just so happy for you, Brie. The call ended shortly after, with promises to tell me all about their New York adventures when they returned. I sat in silence, staring at my dark phone screen, wondering why I felt so hollow inside. It was just a pair of earrings, I told myself. Just a sentimental gift for a special occasion. It didn't mean anything. But deep down, I knew it did. It was symbolic of something I'd been trying not to see for years, the fundamental imbalance in how my parents viewed their two daughters. The realization settled in my stomach like a stone, heavy and immovable. For the first time, I allowed myself to compile the mental list of all the times Brielle had been prioritized, celebrated, and cherished in ways I never was. As I climbed into bed that night, I told myself I was being dramatic, that sibling rivalry was making me imagine slights where none existed. My parents loved me. Of course they did. They had opened their home to me in my time of need. But as I drifted into uneasy sleep, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered a question I couldn't silence. If they truly loved me equally, why did it never feel that way? 2 weeks after Brielle's graduation, I finally received a promising job offer from an architectural firm in Seattle. The position wasn't exactly what I'd been hoping for, more administrative than creative, but it came with a decent salary and the potential for growth. Most importantly, it would give me the financial independence to leave my parents' house and start fresh on the opposite side of the country. I was sitting at the kitchen island calculating moving costs on my laptop when my phone lit up with a FaceTime call from my parents. They were supposed to be visiting Brielle to help her move into her new apartment in Brooklyn, a luxurious one-bedroom that they were subsidizing until she got established in her entry-level position at a fashion magazine. "Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad," I answered brightly, genuinely excited to share my news. They greeted me with smiles that seemed slightly strained. Behind them, I could see the sleek, modern furnishings of Brielle's new place, all clean lines and neutral tones with pops of color, exactly her style. "How's the move going?" I asked. "Exhausting," Mom sighed. "But we're almost done. Brielle just went to pick up lunch for all of us." "That's great. I actually have some exciting news." I started, but Dad's phone beeped with another incoming call. "Hold on, sweetheart, that might be Brielle," he said, putting our call on hold. I waited patiently, sipping my coffee and reviewing the email with the job offer details. After a few minutes, I realized I could hear voices my parents' call with me hadn't disconnected, but they thought it had. They must have answered Brielle's call on Mom's phone, while mine was still active on Dad's. I was about to hang up and call back when I heard my name mentioned. Curiosity kept my finger from pressing the end button. "Savannah, still living at home?" Brielle's voice asked. "Unfortunately, yes," my father replied with a heaviness I'd never heard him use when speaking about me before. "She mentioned something about news when she called, so maybe she's finally found a job that will get her out of our house." My blood ran cold. The casual disdain in his voice was unmistakable. "Living with Savannah was the biggest mistake we ever made," he continued. "I know she's going through a tough time, but it's been almost 2 years. Your mother can barely stand to be in the same room with her anymore. She's just so needy," my mother added. "Always looking for validation, always trying too hard. It's exhausting. Remember how she took over the garden? I had to replant half of it after she killed my prize roses." Mom continued, though I knew for a fact the garden had never looked better than under my care. The roses had bloomed spectacularly. "And the way she's always hovering, offering to help with bills or housework, it's like she's trying to buy her place in the family," Dad said with a chuckle that stabbed straight through my heart. "She'll never know how much we resent her," he added, in a lower voice. "Thank God we have you, Bree. You've always been such an easy child to love." "You guys are awful," Brielle laughed, but there was no real admonishment in her tone. "Savannah tries so hard." "That's the problem," Mom sighed. "She's always been like that, so desperate for approval, not confident and self-assured like you." "Well, I grabbed lunch from that Italian place you like, so let's eat before it gets cold," Brielle said, changing the subject. "Should we call Savannah back? Let's wait until later," Dad suggested. "I'm too hungry and tired to deal with whatever crisis she's having now." I heard shuffling and then the sound of paper bags being opened. They had completely forgotten about me, forgotten that their call was still connected to my phone. I sat frozen, my coffee growing cold in my hands, as my entire understanding of my family relationship crumbled around me. The call disconnected a few minutes later, probably when Dad put his phone in his pocket or set it down somewhere. I remained motionless at the kitchen counter, tears streaming down my face, the words echoing in my mind. Living with Savannah was the biggest mistake we ever made. She'll never know how much we resent her. You've always been such an easy child to love. Everything suddenly made terrible sense. The strained smiles, the thinly veiled impatience, the constant comparison to Brielle. My parents didn't see me as a daughter who needed temporary support. They saw me as a burden they'd been saddled with out of obligation. I wiped my tears and looked down at my laptop. The job offer email still open on the screen. Seattle was over 2,000 miles away from Chicago. Not nearly far enough, it seemed to escape the pain of knowing the truth about my family. With shaking hands, I opened a new email and accepted the position in Seattle, requesting to start as soon as possible. Then I began making lists: what to pack, what to sell, what to leave behind. Every family photo, every holiday ornament, every gift they'd ever given me now seemed tainted props in the performance of parental love. As I worked, a strange calm settled over me. The shock and pain were still there, but alongside them grew something else. A quiet, simmering anger and a determination that would eventually fuel my most satisfying revenge. My parents had no idea that their careless mistake forgetting to hang up a simple phone call would set in motion events that would ultimately expose their true nature, not just to me, but to everyone who thought they knew the perfect Mitchell family. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay awake staring at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom, no, the guest room that had temporarily housed their unwanted adult daughter. The glow-in-the-dark stars I had meticulously arranged into actual constellations when I was 12 were long gone, replaced by tasteful crown molding and a neutral paint scheme. Like my presence in their lives, any trace of my childhood had been carefully erased. By morning, the initial shock had crystallized into something harder and more focused. I didn't cry again. Instead, I began to methodically document everything I had contributed to the household since moving back home. Every dollar spent on groceries, every hour spent tending the garden, every bill I had paid or subsidized. I created a spreadsheet with meticulous detail, calculating the market value of the services I had provided: housekeeping, landscaping, bookkeeping. By any objective measure, I had more than earned my keep. When my phone rang later that day with my mother's FaceTime call, I took a deep breath and answered with a perfectly composed smile. "Savannah, sorry about yesterday. Your father's phone died and we got caught up helping Brielle." Mom explained the lie flowing effortlessly from her. "No problem at all," I replied with practiced brightness. "Actually, I have great news. I've accepted a position with an architectural firm in Seattle. I start in 2 weeks." The relief that flooded her face was unmistakable, though she quickly masked it with what was meant to pass for maternal pride. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful. We always knew you'd land on your feet." "Thanks, Mom. I'll start packing right away. I don't want to be a burden any longer than necessary." A flicker of uncertainty crossed her features at my choice of words, but she recovered quickly. "You've never been a burden, sweetheart. We've loved having you home." The lie hung between us, and for a moment I considered confronting her right then, telling her I'd heard everything. But strategic thinking prevailed. They didn't know what I knew, and that was my advantage. "Is Dad there? I'd love to tell him too." She called him over, and I repeated my news. His enthusiasm was equally transparent, thinly veiled relief masquerading as paternal pride. "Seattle. That's quite a change," he remarked. "Do you need help with moving expenses?" "No thanks," I replied, knowing the offer was merely performative. "I've saved enough." After the call, I threw myself into preparations. I rented a small U-Haul, sold furniture and belongings I wouldn't need, and secured a tiny studio apartment in Seattle, sight unseen. But parallel to these practical arrangements, I was developing another plan, one that would ensure my parents faced consequences for their two-faced behavior. The first phase was simple documentation. I had years of text messages, emails, and social media posts showcasing the disparity in how my parents treated their daughters. I compiled these meticulously, creating a digital timeline that starkly illustrated the pattern of favoritism and neglect. Images of Brielle's lavish 16th birthday juxtaposed with my modest celebration. Screenshots of my parents' effusive comments on Brielle's social media posts compared with their perfunctory responses to my achievements. The second phase required more subtlety. I began recording our conversations legal in Illinois as a one-party consent state. I asked seemingly innocent questions that might reveal their true feelings. "Mom, I've been thinking about family dynamics since I'll be moving so far away. Do you think you and Dad treated Brielle and me differently growing up?" I asked casually one evening while helping her prepare dinner. She nearly dropped the knife she was using. "What? No, of course not. Why would you even ask that? Just curious." Some friends were talking about birth order effects. It's interesting how memory works differently for different family members. She launched into a defensive monologue about how they had always been scrupulously fair, citing examples that I knew were revisionist history. I nodded sympathetically while the voice recorder app on my phone captured every word. The third phase of my plan was the most daring. During my final week at home, I accidentally left my laptop open on the kitchen counter while I went for a run. On the screen was an email draft addressed to several family friends, neighbors, and my parents' colleagues. The subject line read, "The truth about the Mitchell family, a daughter's perspective." When I returned sweaty and breathless, my mother was white-faced at the kitchen island, my laptop now closed. "Good run?" she asked, her voice strained. "Great, the weather's perfect today." I grabbed my laptop casually. "I'm going to shower and then finish some moving arrangements." Throughout the day, I noticed both parents watching me, warily exchanging meaningful glances when they thought I wasn't looking. That evening, my father knocked on my bedroom door. "Savannah, your mother and I were thinking." We'd like to throw you a goodbye dinner before you leave. Invite some family friends to wish you well on your new adventure." I pretended to consider the offer. "That sounds nice, but there's really no need. I wouldn't want to be a burden." His eye twitched at the word burden. "It's no burden at all. We insist." "How about this Friday?" I agreed with feigned reluctance, knowing they were scrambling to maintain their image as devoted parents. The dinner would serve my purposes perfectly. The final piece of my plan came together when I discovered an old family photo album in the attic while ostensibly searching for some childhood belongings. It contained pictures from before Brielle was born, images of my parents looking young and happy, doting on me as their firstborn daughter. Their expressions in those photos showed genuine love, not the performative affection I'd grown accustomed to. I found this old album, I said, bringing it down to show my mother. I don't remember ever seeing these pictures before. She took it from me with a strange expression. "These are from before. Well, before a lot of things changed." "What changed?" I pressed gently. She hesitated, then closed the album firmly. "Nothing important. Just life growing up responsibilities. You know how it goes." But there had been something in her eyes, guilt, perhaps, or a ghost of old regrets. For the first time, I wondered if there might be more to the story than simple favoritism. Whatever it was, I intended to uncover it at the goodbye dinner, where our entire social circle would bear witness to the fallout. As the day of my departure drew closer, I felt a curious mixture of emotions. Beneath the hurt and anger lay a bedrock of determination. My parents had spent years crafting a narrative about our family that bore little resemblance to reality. Now it was my turn to tell my version of the story, and unlike theirs, mine would be backed by evidence. The farewell dinner would be just the beginning. Little did they know that from my new life in Seattle, I would continue to unravel the perfect family facade they had worked so hard to maintain. The truth, as they would soon discover, had a way of emerging, especially when strategically revealed by a daughter they had gravely underestimated. Friday evening arrived, and with it came an unexpected wave of nostalgia as I dressed in my childhood bedroom for the last time. I chose my outfit carefully, a sophisticated navy blue dress that projected confidence and success, not the desperate neediness my parents had described behind my back. As I applied my makeup, I looked at my reflection and whispered a promise to myself. After tonight, everything changes. Downstairs, my parents had transformed our dining room into a showcase of parental pride. A banner reading, "Congratulations," Savannah hung across one wall. Fresh flowers adorned the table, and Mom had prepared all my favorite foods, or what she thought were my favorites, though she'd confused several of them with Brielle's preferences. The irony wasn't lost on me. Guests began arriving at 7. My parents had invited about 20 people, family friends, neighbors, a few of my high school teachers, and some of their colleagues who had known me since childhood. Each guest greeted me with genuine enthusiasm about my new job, though I noticed several curious glances exchanged. Clearly, my parents had been controlling the narrative about my extended stay at home. "We always knew you'd land on your feet," said Mrs. Peterson, our neighbor of 15 years. "Your mother was just telling me last week how worried she was about you finding your path." I smiled politely. "Was she? That's interesting to hear." Brielle arrived fashionably late, making a grand entrance in a designer outfit that probably cost more than my first month's rent in Seattle. She hugged me with theatrical affection. "I'm so proud of you, sis," she exclaimed, loudly enough for everyone to hear. Then lowering her voice, she added, "Mom and Dad are really relieved, you know. They've been stressing about your situation for months." "I'm sure they have," I replied evenly. Throughout dinner, my parents performed their roles flawlessly. Mom told stories of my childhood achievements, carefully edited to fit the narrative of a loving, supportive family. Dad raised toast after toast to my future success. anyone watching would have seen exactly what they wanted them to see, devoted parents celebrating their accomplished daughter. As dessert was being served, my alleged favorite cake, which was actually Brielle's preference, Dad clinked his glass for attention. "We'd like to present Savannah with a small going-away gift," he announced, handing me a beautifully wrapped package. Inside was a silver picture frame containing a family photo from my high school graduation. We were all smiling, the perfect family portrait. Along with it was an envelope containing a check, a surprisingly generous amount that I immediately recognized as conscience money. "Thank you," I said, genuinely surprised by the gift. "This is very generous." "We're so proud of you, honey," Mom said, squeezing my hand for the benefit of our audience. "We know you'll do amazing things in Seattle." The moment felt surreal, their words so at odds with what I knew they truly felt. For a second, I wavered. Would it be better to simply accept their performance, take their money and leave without confrontation, start fresh in Seattle with no bridges burned? But then I remembered their words. Living with Savannah was the biggest mistake we ever made. She'll never know how much we resent her. I stood up, still holding the picture frame. "I'd like to say a few words," I announced, my voice steadier than I expected. "First, thank you all for coming tonight. It means a lot to see so many faces from throughout my life." My parents beamed, clearly relieved that I was following the script of the grateful daughter. I've been reflecting a lot recently on family, what it means, what it should be, and what happens when the reality doesn't match the appearance. I paused, watching my parents' smiles begin to falter. 2 weeks ago, I had an enlightening experience. I continued. My parents called me from New York, where they were helping Brielle move into her new apartment, an apartment they're subsidizing just as they fully funded her education and lifestyle, despite what they've told many of you about, treating us equally. The room had gone completely silent. My father half rose from his chair, but my mother's hand on his arm stopped him. During that call, they accidentally forgot to hang up, and I heard them express their true feelings about having me live at home during a difficult time in my life. I removed my phone from my purse and held it up. I heard them say that living with me was the biggest mistake they ever made, and that I would never know how much they resent me. Gasps echoed around the table. "Mrs." Peterson put her hand over her mouth. My former English teacher, Mrs. Winters, who had always seen through social facades, nodded slightly as if pieces of a puzzle were finally fitting together. "Savannah, I think you misunderstood," my father began, but I cut him off. "I didn't misunderstand, Dad. You were very clear. You also said that Brielle has always been such an easy child to love, the implication being that I was not. Honey, we were tired, stressed about the move my mother tried. You were honest," I corrected her. Maybe for the first time in years. And while it was painful to hear, I'm actually grateful. It explained so much about my childhood, about the constant feeling that I was failing to meet some invisible standard. I looked around at the shocked faces of our guests. I'm not sharing this to hurt my parents or to gain sympathy. I'm sharing it because I'm done participating in a fiction. For years, I believed I was part of a loving family that supported each other equally. Now I know that was never true. Brielle was staring at her plate, her cheeks flushed. "Savannah, this is so inappropriate." "What's inappropriate," I interrupted firmly, "is telling your friends and colleagues that you've sacrificed so much to support both your daughters equally when the reality is dramatically different." I turned to face the table. "Did you know that when I lost my job during the pandemic, I offered to pay rent while staying here? My parents refused, saying, 'Family doesn't charge family.' Meanwhile, they've been paying Brielle's rent in New York for 3 years. That's completely different," my father protested, his face reddening. "You're right, it is different." I agreed, because unlike Brielle, I actually contributed to this household. I maintained the garden, deep cleaned, weekly handled the bills, and cooked regularly. According to market rates, the services I provided while living here would have cost approximately $28,000 per year. I nodded toward my laptop on the sideboard. I have a spreadsheet if anyone would like to review my calculations. My father stood up abruptly. I think this dinner is over. Thank you all for coming, but our family needs some privacy now. Privacy, I repeated with a bitter laugh. That's always been the solution, hasn't it? Keep everything behind closed doors. Maintain the perfect family image at all costs. Savannah, please, my mother pleaded, tears now streaming down her face. Whether they were genuine or another performance, I couldn't tell anymore. I picked up the check they had given me and placed it back on the table. I don't want your guilt money. I don't want anything from you except honesty, something you've never been able to give me. I looked around the table one last time. I leave for Seattle tomorrow. I'm not sharing this to destroy my family, but to free myself from a lifetime of trying to earn love that was never going to be given freely. I hope someday we can build a relationship based on truth, but I'm not holding my breath. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, to my surprise, Mrs. Winters stood up. Richard, Ellen, I've known your family for 15 years, she said quietly, and I've always noticed how differently you spoke about your daughters. I convinced myself I was imagining it. I wish now that I had said something sooner. This unexpected support broke something in the room. Several guests murmured in agreement, others looked uncomfortable, and a few began to gather their things to leave. My parents stood frozen, their perfect family narrative crumbling before their eyes. Brielle looked shell-shocked, perhaps realizing for the first time how her golden child status had affected me. I picked up my purse and the framed photograph. I'll be staying at a hotel tonight. My U-Haul is already packed. I'll pick it up in the morning and be on my way. I turned to our guests. Thank you all for coming. I'm sorry this evening took an unexpected turn. As I walked toward the door, I heard my father call after me. Savannah, wait. There are things you don't understand. I paused at the threshold. You're right about that. There's a lot I don't understand. Like why parents would treat one child so differently from another. Or why you've resented me specifically for needing temporary help when you've supported Brielle her entire adult life. Maybe someday you'll explain it to me. But tonight I need to leave. Before I could make my exit, my mother's voice, uncharacteristically small, stopped me. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she said. We never meant for it to happen this way. Something in her tone made me turn back. What wasn't supposed to be like this, Mom? She exchanged a long look with my father, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, he nodded slightly. We need to tell her, he said quietly. She deserves to know. The atmosphere in the room shifted yet again, tension, giving way to a strange anticipatory silence. Whatever they were about to reveal, it was clear from their expressions that it would change everything again. I stood on the precipice of yet another revelation about my family, wondering if I was ready for whatever painful truth they had kept hidden for so long. But I had come too far to back down now. Taking a deep breath, I walked back into the dining room and took my seat once more, waiting for the final act in the unraveling of the Mitchell family myth. Hey everyone! If you're enjoying this story so far, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I'm dying to know what you think might be happening here. What secret could possibly explain my parents' behavior? Drop your theories in the comments below. The twist coming up in the next part is something I never saw coming. The remaining guests sensed the gravity of the moment and quickly made their excuses, filing out with awkward goodbyes and concerned glances. Within minutes, only the four of us remained in the dining room. My parents, Brielle and me, surrounded by half-eaten desserts and the wreckage of our family's public image. Dad sank heavily into his chair, suddenly looking older than his 62 years. Mom's hands trembled as she mechanically began gathering dirty plates, a nervous habit I'd observed countless times. Leave the dishes, Ellen, Dad said softly. They can wait. She nodded and sat down, her eyes fixed on the tablecloth. Brielle looked between our parents, confusion evident on her face. What's going on? What does Savannah deserve to know? She asked. My father took a deep breath. It's something we should have told both of you long ago, something that complicated our family in ways we never anticipated. You're scaring me, Brielle said, her voice uncharacteristically small. I remained silent, my anger temporarily suspended by genuine curiosity. Whatever they were about to reveal had clearly haunted them for years. Dad reached for Mom's hand. Ellen, I think you should start. Mom nodded, her eyes finally meeting mine. Savannah, do you remember that photo album you found in the attic? The one with pictures from before Brielle was born? Yes, I replied cautiously. You asked me what changed after those photos were taken. The truth is, everything changed. She took a shuddering breath. Your father and I were different people then, young and idealistic. We were just starting our careers, building our life together, and then we had you, our beautiful, perfect little girl. She smiled sadly, the first genuine expression I'd seen from her in years. Those first 4 years with you were the happiest of my life. You were such a joy, curious, bright, affectionate. We thought our family was complete. Dad picked up the narrative. But then I was offered a partnership at a prestigious surgical practice, a major career advancement. The only catch was we had to relocate to Chicago from Boston. It meant uprooting our lives, but the opportunity was too good to pass up. I remember the move vaguely, I said. I was about 3, right? Almost 4, Mom corrected. The transition was difficult for all of us. I had to rebuild my practice from scratch. Your father was working constantly to prove himself at the new hospital. And you? You struggled with the change. You became withdrawn, had trouble sleeping. That's normal for a child, dealing with a major move, I pointed out. Yes, but it was hard on us, especially with our demanding careers, Dad continued. We hired a nanny to help Margaret. She was experienced, came with glowing recommendations. She seemed like the perfect solution. Mom's grip on Dad's hand tightened. For about 6 months, everything seemed to be working out. We were settling into our new lives. Your father's career was thriving. My practice was slowly growing. You seemed to be adjusting, and then I prompted when she fell silent. And then I got pregnant with Brielle. Mom said, her voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't planned. We were still finding our footing in Chicago, both working long hours, but we decided to make it work. Brielle shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I don't understand what this has to do with how you treated Savannah. Dad held up a hand. Let us finish, please. He turned back to me. The pregnancy was difficult for your mother. She was put on bed rest for the last trimester. I was overwhelmed with work and caring for her. We became even more dependent on Margaret to look after you. I was hospitalized twice during those months, Mom added. Your father would stay with me and you would stay with Margaret at her apartment. We trusted her completely. A chill ran down my spine. I suddenly had a feeling I knew where this story was heading. What did she do to me? I asked quietly. Mom's eyes filled with tears. We didn't know. Not for a long time. On the surface, everything seemed fine. You were quiet when we were around, but Margaret assured us it was just adjustment to the idea of having a sibling. After Brielle was born, things got more complicated. Dad continued. Your mother had postpartum depression. I was juggling my new position and caring for a newborn. Margaret continued to be our lifeline with you. My stomach knotted as I began to understand. What happened with Margaret? Dad looked down at his hands. When Brielle was about 8 months old, you started having nightmares, terrible ones. You became anxious, had unexplainable fears. We took you to a child psychologist who suggested there might be signs of emotional abuse. We confronted Margaret. Mom said, her voice breaking. At first, she denied everything, but eventually a neighbor came forward. She had overheard Margaret speaking to you in the apartment, saying horrible things, telling you that we didn't love you anymore, that we only cared about the new baby, that you were a burden to us. I felt the blood drain from my face. She told me I was unwanted. Not just that, Dad said grimly. She systematically convinced you that you were less loved, less important. She would praise Brielle in front of you while criticizing everything you did. She told you we complained about you when you weren't around. The psychologist believed she had been doing this for months, possibly since before Brielle was born. We fired her immediately, of course, Mom said. Filed reports with every childcare agency. But the damage? She looked at me with naked pain in her eyes. The damage was already done. The psychologist explained that your developing brain had internalized these messages, Dad continued. You began to expect rejection from us, to see favoritism where there was none. You became hypervigilant, constantly looking for signs that we preferred Brielle. And rather than correct that perception, I said bitterly, you reinforced it. You actually did start favoring Brielle. Mom shook her head, tears streaming down her face. That's where we failed you, Savannah. The psychologist warned us that you might misinterpret normal parental behaviors as rejection. She advised us to be extremely careful about treating you both identically, to go overboard with reassurance for you. But we were exhausted, overwhelmed parents, Dad admitted. Sometimes it was just easier to give in to Brielle's demands than to deal with your suspicious scrutiny of our every move. Over time, we began to resent the constant need to prove our love to you. So you stopped trying, I said, the pieces finally clicking into place. We did worse than that, Mom whispered. We started to avoid situations that might trigger your insecurities. We began to include you, less invite your scrutiny less. And that, of course, only confirmed your deepest fears. By the time you were teenagers, Dad continued, the pattern was set. Brielle trusted our love implicitly, never questioned it. You were always watching, always comparing, always keeping score. It was exhausting for all of us. So you chose the easier child, I said flatly. We failed you. Dad acknowledged, his eyes wet. We took the path of least resistance. And over time, your suspicion and our avoidance created a self-fulfilling prophecy. We did begin to treat you differently. We did begin to favor Brielle, not because we loved her more, but because loving her was simpler. Brielle had gone completely pale. I had no idea, she whispered. All these years, I thought. She looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time. Savannah, I'm so sorry. None of this was your fault, I told her, surprised by the genuine conviction in my voice. You were a baby. You didn't create this situation. But I benefited from it, she replied. I got everything while you got suspicion and resentment. I turned back to my parents. Why didn't you ever tell me about Margaret? About what happened? Mom wiped her eyes. The psychologist advised against it. She said it might further traumatize you, make you feel responsible somehow. She recommended intensive therapy for all of us, but your father's career was taking off. My practice was growing. We convinced ourselves we could handle it on our own. And then as you got older, it seemed too late, Dad added. How do you tell your teenage daughter that your parental negligence allowed her to be emotionally abused for months, that her trust issues aren't paranoia, but the result of real trauma? We were cowards, Savannah. We were ashamed. I sat in stunned silence trying to process this revelation. All my life I had sensed something was wrong with how my family functioned. I had attributed it to some deficiency in me, something that made me less lovable than my sister. Now, I learned it was the result of deliberate psychological manipulation by a trusted caregiver, compounded by years of parental mishandling. When you moved back home after losing your job, Mom said quietly all those old patterns resurfaced immediately. Your hypervigilance, our avoidance, the whole toxic cycle. We should have seen it as an opportunity to finally address the underlying issues, but instead, you resented me for triggering your guilt, I finished for her. Dad nodded miserably. Living with you meant facing our greatest failure as parents every day. It was easier to blame you for being needy than to acknowledge that we created that neediness through our negligence and subsequent cowardice. The silence that followed was heavy with decades of misunderstanding and pain. Finally, Brielle spoke. So, what happens now? Can we fix this? Can we be a real family? I looked at my sister, my innocent, unknowing sister who had been cast as the villain in my narrative, just as I had been cast as the difficult child in my parents. None of us had chosen these roles. I don't know, I answered honestly. This is a lot to process. I've spent my entire life feeling like an outsider in my own family, and now I find out it was all based on a lie told by a disturbed woman decades ago. Not just her lie, Dad said firmly. Our failure to correct it, to heal it. That's on us, Savannah, not on you. Never on you. I nodded unexpectedly, moved by his acknowledgement. I still need to go to Seattle, I said after a moment. I need space to think about all this, to figure out what it means for me, for us. We understand, Mom said, though. The pain in her eyes was evident. But Savannah, please know that despite our terrible mistakes, we do love you. We always have. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to consider the possibility that this might be true, that beneath the resentment and avoidance my parents did love me, had always loved me, but had failed to show it in ways I could recognize or trust. I'll call when I get settled in Seattle, I promised. Maybe we can try family therapy. Long distance at first. The relief on their faces was palpable. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was an opening, a possibility for something new to emerge from the ashes of our old, broken family dynamic. As I left that night for my hotel, I felt strangely lighter, as if I had set down a burden I had been carrying my entire life. The knowledge that my suspicions hadn't been baseless, paranoia that there was a reason for the disconnect I had always felt was oddly validating. The damage was real. The pain was justified. But perhaps armed with the truth at last, healing was possible too. The drive to Seattle took me 6 days. I could have made it in 4, but I deliberately took a meandering route, stopping at roadside attractions and scenic overlooks, giving myself time to absorb the seismic shift in my understanding of my family and myself. Each mile between Chicago and my new home felt like shedding a layer of the person I had been, the suspicious scorekeeping daughter, always hungry for validation I believed would never come. My tiny studio apartment in the Fremont neighborhood was exactly as advertised, cramped but charming, with a window that overlooked a community garden. I spent the first week setting up my new life, assembling secondhand furniture, locating the nearest grocery store and laundromat, finding my way around the neighborhood. Simple concrete tasks that required no emotional energy. At night, though, lying on my new mattress on the floor, the bed frame would arrive the following week. I found myself replaying the farewell dinner and my parents' revelation over and over. The pieces were slowly falling into place, childhood memories recontextualized family dynamics, suddenly making terrible sense. I remembered how around age 5 I had developed an obsessive need to compare my birthday presents with Brielle's, counting the number of gifts, estimating their value. My parents had called it petty jealousy. Now I recognized it as the desperate scorekeeping of a child who had been told she was less loved. My first day at the architectural firm was a welcome distraction from these ruminations. Rainier Northwest Architects was smaller than my previous firm in Chicago, but the team was friendly and the projects more varied than I had anticipated. My role was primarily administrative, but my supervisor Elaine made it clear there would be opportunities to contribute design ideas as I proved myself. We believe in developing our team members, she told me during my orientation. "Where do you see yourself in 5 years, Savannah?" The question caught me off guard. Before the revelations about my family, I might have given a safe, modest answer, not wanting to seem presumptuous or ambitious. But something had shifted inside me. Leading my own residential projects, I answered with surprising confidence. I have a particular interest in sustainable urban housing that doesn't sacrifice aesthetic appeal for functionality. Elaine looked pleased. Ambitious. I like that. Let's schedule some time next month to talk about how we can help you move in that direction. That brief exchange set the tone for my new professional life in Seattle, one where I didn't automatically assume I was being judged and found wanting, where I could state my ambitions clearly without fear of rejection. 2 weeks after moving, I kept my promise and called my parents. The conversation was awkward, but civil. We carefully avoided any mention of the bombshell they had dropped at the farewell dinner, focusing instead on safe topics, my new apartment, the Seattle weather, my first impressions of the firm. As I was about to hang up, my father cleared his throat. "Savannah, we've started seeing a family therapist. The three of us, your mother, Brielle, and me." I was genuinely surprised. "That's good." "How is it going?" "It's difficult," he admitted. "Painful, but necessary." "The therapist thinks it would be beneficial if you could join a session remotely sometime when you're ready." "I'll think about it," I promised, and I meant it. The following week, an unexpected package arrived at my apartment. Inside was a leather-bound journal with a note from Brielle. "I've been writing down memories of us growing up trying to see things from your perspective for the first time. It's opened my eyes to so much I never noticed. When you're ready to talk, I'm here. Love you, sis." The gesture brought tears to my eyes. Of all the family members, Brielle was the least culpable for the dysfunction. Yet she was making perhaps the most genuine effort to understand and repair. I found myself purchasing a journal of my own that weekend, beginning the painful process of revisiting my childhood memories through the lens of what I now knew. I wrote about the time Margaret had taken me for ice cream after a doctor's appointment and told me casually that my parents had said I was much more difficult than Brielle, how they wished I could be more like her. I had been 6 years old. The memory had always been confusing, the pleasant treat juxtaposed with the devastating message. Now it made sense. 3 months into my new life, I finally agreed to join a virtual family therapy session. Dr. Winters, a gentle-voiced woman with silver-streaked hair, facilitated the conversation with remarkable skill, creating a space where painful truths could be acknowledged without assigning blame. The damage done to Savannah as a child created a framework through which she interpreted all subsequent family interactions, she explained. Meanwhile, Richard and Ellen, you were operating from a framework of avoidance and compensation. And Brielle, you were an unwitting beneficiary of a dynamic that predated your awareness. Put so clinically, the family dysfunction seemed almost logical, a series of understandable responses to an initial trauma, each reinforcing the other in an ever-tightening spiral. Over the subsequent months, these therapy sessions became a regular part of my life. Sometimes they left me emotionally drained, other times cautiously hopeful. Progress was neither linear nor guaranteed, but it was undeniable. Slowly, painfully, we were learning to be a different kind of family, one built on honesty rather than appearances. My professional life in Seattle was blossoming in ways I hadn't anticipated. My administrative role evolved as I demonstrated my design capabilities. 6 months after starting, I was assigned as a junior designer on a sustainable apartment complex project, exactly the kind of work I had told Elaine I aspired to do. My personal life was developing too. I joined a recreational soccer league, something I had always wanted to try but had never pursued in Chicago. I made friends with my neighbors, hosted small dinner parties in my tiny apartment, and even went on a few dates approaching these new relationships with a tentative openness that would have been impossible before. 9 months after moving to Seattle, I returned to Chicago for Thanksgiving, my first visit back since the dramatic farewell dinner. My parents had sold the Lake Forest house, downsizing to a condominium downtown that held no childhood memories, good or bad. It was a fresh start for all of us. The visit was neither perfect nor catastrophic. There were moments of tension, old patterns threatening to reassert themselves. But there were also moments of genuine connection. My father and I discovering a shared interest in urban photography, my mother asking sincerely about my design projects, Brielle and I staying up late reminiscing about childhood memories that, viewed through our new understanding, took on different meanings. On my last evening in Chicago, my mother handed me a small velvet box. Inside were my grandmother's diamond earrings, the ones that had been given to Brielle at her graduation. "Brielle wanted you to have these," she said quietly. She insisted. I looked across the room at my sister, who gave me a small, sad smile. "They should have been yours all along," she said simply. I closed the box gently and handed it back. "Keep them," I told her. "Grandmother would have wanted you to have them." And for the first time, I meant it. No resentment, no scorekeeping, just the simple acknowledgement that some past wrongs couldn't be undone, only accepted and released. The real gift came later that night as I was packing for my return flight to Seattle. My father knocked on the guest room door, holding a different box, this one old and slightly battered. "I found this in storage when we were moving," he said, placing it on the bed. "I thought you might want it." Inside were dozens of childhood drawings. I had made report cards with teacher comments, praising my creativity and intelligence ribbons from elementary school science fairs. Even the program from a third-grade play where I had played. The lead role. My father had saved everything. "You kept all this?" I asked, genuinely stunned. He nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Every accomplishment, every milestone. I know it doesn't make up for the ways we failed you, Savannah. Nothing can. But I need you to know that we were proud of you. Always. We just didn't know how to show it in ways you could trust." It wasn't a perfect resolution. Those don't exist outside of fairy tales. The damage done over decades couldn't be erased by a box of mementos or a few months of therapy. But as I flew back to Seattle the next day, I felt something I hadn't experienced in relation to my family before: hope. The accidental phone call that had revealed my parents' true feelings, or what I had believed were their true feelings, had set in motion events that ultimately uncovered a deeper, more complex truth. Our family had been broken, yes, but not in the ways I had always assumed. And in that new understanding lay the possibility of healing, not by forgetting the past, but by finally acknowledging it honestly. Seattle was waiting for me with its misty mornings and creative energy, my growing career, and expanding social circle. But Chicago no longer represented only pain and rejection. It had become something else now, the place where at long last the real story of my family had begun to be told. 1 year after that fateful phone call, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood, watching the sunset paint the sky in dramatic strokes of orange and purple. I had recently been promoted to associate designer at Rainier Northwest Architects with my own small team and a signature project, an eco-friendly housing development that incorporated community gardens and shared workspaces. The cramped studio had been replaced by this modest but stylish one-bedroom, decorated with items that reflected my emerging sense of self-artwork, from local artists' furniture I had selected because I genuinely liked it rather than because it projected a certain image. My phone buzzed with an incoming text from Brielle. "Video call tomorrow to finalize Christmas plans. Mom and Dad are thinking Seattle this year if that works for you." I smiled as I typed my reply. "Perfect. My place is small but cozy. Looking forward to showing you all my city." The idea of hosting my family for the holidays would have been unthinkable a year ago. But the monthly therapy sessions, now reduced to bi-monthly check-ins, had gradually transformed our dynamic. We weren't a perfect family and never would be. The scars of the past remained occasionally making themselves felt in moments of stress or miscommunication. But we had developed tools to recognize and address these moments rather than retreating into our old destructive patterns. My parents had retired earlier than planned, using their newfound free time to travel and to work on their relationship with each other and with both their daughters. My mother had even started volunteering with a child advocacy organization that vetted caregivers and provided support to parents navigating the childcare system, her way of channeling her regret into something productive. Brielle and I had developed a relationship independent of our parents, discovering a genuine friendship beneath the artificial rivalry that had defined our childhood. She had recently left her fashion magazine job to start her own sustainable clothing line, and we had even discussed the possibility of collaborating on designs for eco-conscious living and working spaces, merging our respective talents in unexpected ways. As for me, the hyper-vigilant, approval-seeking woman who had moved back to her parents' home in desperation had been replaced by someone more confident, more authentic, and paradoxically, more forgiving. I had learned that the greatest revenge against those who had hurt you wasn't exposing them publicly or making them suffer. It was breaking free of the patterns they had instilled and creating a life guided by your own values, rather than reactions to past pain. The accidental phone call had been a blessing disguised as a curse, the catalyst for painful but necessary truth-telling that had ultimately set us all free from roles we had been playing for decades without even realizing it. As the last light faded from the Seattle sky, I made a silent toast to new beginnings and unexpected journeys to family ties that could bend without breaking, and to the surprising discovery that sometimes the most meaningful justice comes, not from punishment, but from healing. So that's my story, everyone. How an accidental eavesdrop changed everything and ultimately led to unexpected healing. Has anything like this ever happened in your family? Have you experienced that moment when a painful truth ultimately leads to something better? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more real-life family stories with unexpected twists. Thank you for coming on this journey with me. Sometimes the hardest conversations are the ones that finally set us free. Share this with someone who might need to hear that family healing is possible even after years of misunderstanding. Until next time,